We are learning Likutei Sichos Chelek Tezvav, the second Sicha of Vayishlach, and Yutas Kislev as well, which is on page 274. The shir today is being learned L'Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Menashe Koltman. In Pasuk Katainti Mikol HaChasadim Geimer. The Pasuk says that Yaakov Avinu returning from Charan back to Eretz Yisrael on his way to meet Esav. So he says, Katainti Mikol HaChasadim, I've been humbled because of all of the kindness that Hashem has done with me. With my stick, I passed through this Yarden. And now, as the pasuk continues, now I'm here with all my children, and I'm divided into two camps. So the meaning of what Yaakov means when he says, there are two meanings in this, two interpretations, and they're opposites. Aleph, one pshat here is the Pirish HaPashot. The simple pshat is wie es teich der Targum und Rashi in sein ersten Pirish, as the Targum says, and as Rashi in his first pshat says, V'oid, and additional commentaries say this, as Yaakov is übergegangen dem Yarden, when Yaakov came, when he was coming from Eretz Yisrael to Charan, and he passed through the Yarden, so he came, nit hobendik mit sich kein shum zach oise sein makel. He had nothing with him other than a stick. So according to this pshat, what this means over here is, as the verte, b'makli avarti es hayardin hazeh, when Yaakov says, I came here with my stick, drike nois, what it's expressing is nit die chasadim was der Eibusher hat getan mit Yaakovin, not the kindness that Hashem has done with Yaakov, nor fakert. It's expressing the opposite. Dem begashmius orem and matzev from Yaakov Avinu be'esar zaribe dem yarden. The fact that Yaakov Avinu materially was very poor when he came, passing through the Yarden, going to Chutzlaretz, going to Charan. So why is Yaakov saying this? Es is a Hagdame. This is an introduction. Was is noch mehr mavlit die Großkeit von dem spätendigen Chesed von Va'ata Yisi l'shnei machnois. This emphasizes even more the great kindness of Hashem, the fact that he came completely empty-handed. He came totally alone, just with a stick in his hands. And now when he returns, he's returning with two camps. Versteht nach dem Pasuk, which the Pasuk says afterwards. So it's only the Va'ata Yisi l'shnei machnes, which is actually the chesed of the Eibusher. The Makli avarti as a Yarden is expressing his poverty. And it's only here to emphasize the great bracha that follows in the Pasuk. Beis. But then there's another pshat in what Kibbe Makli means. Then Pirish HaMedrash, what it says in the Medrash, Arab gebracht euchen Pirish Rashi. And Rashi quotes this as well. As Nosan Makle b'Yarden v'nifka Yarden. That right here, when Yaakov Avinu came to pass the Yarden, so he placed his stick into the Yarden, and the Yarden split, and he was able to go through. Was like dem Pirish enthalten die Werte b'Makli avarti gai megufe an inyan von Chazdei Hashem. According to this pshat, the Makli avarti itself is expressing the kindness that Hashem did for him, this miracle that the Yarden split for him. Und die Pirushim sind in Hofchim betachlis. These two interpretations of V'makli avarti are opposites and complete absolute opposites. Leuten ersten Pirush, Anias betachlis. According to the first pshat, it is showing how poor Yaakov was. He came totally empty-handed, nothing. Alone, he comes alone with his stick. The lowest level of poverty. Like in Zweiten Pirish, according to the second pshat, so Roit so Anesachi Gadol. This shows a tremendous miracle that happened here, and that it shows the level of Yaakov that he was worthy of this great miracle. Or Baloshan Chazal, in the Lashon that it says in the Gemara, Kamenofish Gavra, how great is the person, K'Moshe V'shitn Rivevan, as great as Moshe Rabbeinu and the 600,000 Yidden, Shenechlek Lem Yamsuf, that the Yamsuf is split for them. So we understand over here that these two pshatim of Kibbe Makli avarti es hayarden hazeh are not only two different pshatim, but they're hafchim, they're opposite pirushim, and hafchim betachlis, complete opposite pirushim, whether it's aniyas betachlis or a level that he's right to hanesachi gadol, to the greatest miracle. So to verstehen dem Verbund von die zwei pirushim, to understand the connection that there is to these two interpretations of these words, Kibbe Makli avarti es hayarden hazeh. Warum wie viel mal gerät, as already said many times, haben alle Pirushim auf demselben Wort, Pasuk oder Inyan, a kesher teuchni zwischen sich. Whenever you have more than one pshat on one word or one pasuk or one subject, there has to be a connection of the content of the various different interpretations that there is in this one inyan. This is a recurrent theme in the Rebbe's Sichos. The Rebbe speaks about all the time, that there always is a connection of all the pirushim in one pasuk. And especially that in the Medrash, these two pirushim here follow one after the other. So let's begin with the Alter Rebbe in sein bewussten Igeres Katainti, in the very well-known letter that Alter Rebbe wrote, beginning with this pasuk of Katainti, was hat geschrieben, kommendig from Peterburg nach der Geule von Yitas Kislev, which Alter Rebbe wrote after he returned from Peterburg, where the Alter Rebbe was arrested after the liberation of Yitas Kislev. So the Alter Rebbe there teaches and says as follows: Mipnei hayes koten Yaakov b'ma'oid ma'oid be'einav. Since Yaakov was extremely humble in his eyes. Machmas ribuya chasad, because of the abundance of kindness that Hashem gave him. And what is that? Ki b'makli chulu. And Alter Rebbe quotes the pasuk, Ki b'makli chulu. That's all. At kan l'shoinoi b'hanegei l'inyaneinu. This is the quote of the words of the Alter Rebbe, which is relevant for the discussion here. So now, what's interesting is the Alter Rebbe is only quoting Ki b'makli. Is nicht verstandig, so seemingly this is not understood. Wie bald, der Alter Rebbe will betonen dem Ribuya Chasad, was der Rebbe hat getan mit Yaakov, the Alter Rebbe is coming to emphasize the abundance of Chasadim, Ribuya Chasadim, that Rebbe performed for Yaakov. Was das hat bei ihm herausgerufen, dem Katainti, and this is what brought out of Yaakov his Katainti, to feel small, to his humility. Hat gedacht bringen euch. The Alter Rebbe should also quote, primarily you should quote, the conclusion of the pasuk, where it talks about the actual kindness. The fact that he came on the Yarden with his makal, and now he's two machnes. That's the main chesed. In these two words of ki b'makli, it doesn't say about any chesed yet. So what's the ribuya chasadim in ki b'makli? L'chayre what we can't learn. So seemingly you could say, as mit ki b'makli chulu, when the Alter Rebbe says just these words of the pasuk, ki b'makli chulu, meint the Alter Rebbe andeiten auf den oben gebrachten Pirish from Medrash. The Alter Rebbe is hinting to the previously quoted pshat that it says in the Medrash, not the actual words ki b'makli, but also the pshat that the Medrash says in these words, which is nasan makle b'yarden v'nifka yarden, that he used this stick to split the Yarden, and that's the significance about ki b'makli. So these two words hints to the kindness, to the ribuya chasadim of the Eibishter. Aber me kann es nicht sagen. It's difficult to say that Alter Rebbe just quoting these two words ki b'makli is hinting to the ribuya chasadim that the Medrash is speaking about, that the Yarden split. Because Aleph number 1, es bleibt noch halt schwer, the question still remains, verwasset dem Mund nicht euch dem zweiten Chesed? Versteht me furisch im Pasuk. Vata yisil l'shnei machnes. Why would Alter Rebbe only quote ki b'makli, hinting to the pshat that the Medrash says, which is not explicit in the Pasuk? Why wouldn't he quote the continuation of the pasuk, where it clearly in the pasuk says what the chesed of the Eibishter did to him is ribuya chasadim? If the Alter Rebbe wants to explain that Yaakov was cotton b'ma'oid because of the ribuya chasadim, so why does he just bring two words ki b'makli and not what it says clearly in the pasuk, the actual chesed? Beis, and second of all, the main point here is if the Alter Rebbe meant mit der chacha from pasuk, if the Alter Rebbe is bringing the ribuya chasadim in the proving it from the pasuk, dem nes litten pirish from Medrash as nifka yarden, so he's referring to the miracle that the makel, the sticks, splits the yarden. Wollte doch gedacht zu lieb dem gufe bringen dem hemshech of varti es a yarden azeh. The Alter Rebbe should quote the continuation that with his stick he was able to pass through the yarden. In welches wird nimmer as dem nes was hat sich aufgetan mitten bemakli. Over here you have in the pasuk where you see the accomplishment of the miracle that he was able to pass through the yarden. The two words ki b'makli doesn't even express the pirish that the Medrash says, that he's using a stick to split the Yarden. The Alter Rebbe doesn't bring the words about passing through the Yarden. So what is here? What's significant about these two words of ki b'makli? Mekanet sagen, now we can't say, as the Alter Rebbe meint taka dem ganzen pasuk, that the Alter Rebbe really means to quote the entire pasuk. Now, mekatze sein, bringt the blois das Chaluf from pasuk. As many times you have, not just to be shorter, so you quote the beginning, but really you mean the entire pasuk. Und dem Siyum is a meram is mit dem Wort chulu. And as we see here, the Alter Rebbe hints to the continuation of the pasuk by adding the word chulu, which means it all, that the whole entire pasuk. So we can't say that. Varom, over here, again, we have two reasons. Aleph, number one, al kolponim, noch dem ein Wort of Arti. Just to quote one more word of Arti that he passed through. Hat me gedacht bringen. At least this one word, even if the Alter Rebbe is looking to be mekatzer, but instead of saying ki b'makli chulu, the Alter Rebbe could quote one more word to quote at least one point of what the chesed is. Beis, another point, if the main point of the Alter Rebbe is to quote the continuation of the pasuk, is wie erklärt amal barichis, as it was once explained at length, Volt gedarft stehen vichulu. So then it should say vichulu mit avav hamaisif, with a vav in the beginning of the vichulu. Now there's a difference if you write vichulu, or the same as also vigaimer, or chulu, or gaimer. What's the difference? Oipes steht chulu on avav. If it says chulu without a vav, is das aber weiß, as der hemshach hakosov is nit negate to dem teichen hamaduber. Writing chulu means that you're just hinting to the continuation of the pasuk, but it's not relevant to the subject that we're speaking about. When you write vichulu or vigaimer, so then you're saying you have to add the hemshach of the pasuk that it is relevant to what we're speaking about. That's the difference between gaimer and vigaimer. The Rebbe speaks about this in another place where you see in Tanya this difference. Many times the Alter Rebbe writes gaimer and sometimes vigaimer. What's the difference? Vigaimer is a vav hamaisif, that you have to add that the whole continuation is relevant to the subject. Gaimer is just hinting to the continuation of the pasuk, even though it's not relevant to the point that we're speaking about. On the sugeb chulu ad the gaimer. So then, if it's not relevant to what we're speaking about, so why would you add the word chulu or gaimer to hint to the continuation of the pasuk? Is zu bewarnen, was der Razal haben gesagt, is just because of what the Gemara says, as kol psuke de le paske Moshe anan le paskinan. That a pasuk that Moshe Rabbeinu says fully until the end, so we also quote the pasuk fully the way Moshe Rabbeinu quoted it, and we don't stop in the middle. So the chulu is just to hint the whole full quote of the pasuk, but not that the rest of the pasuk is relevant here. So here, what does the Alter Rebbe say? Ki b'makli chulu, not vichulu, which means that the riboya chasadim is hinted in these two words, ki b'makli. This from them alam is move on. So from this we understand as der inyan from ki b'makli allein, just these two words of ki b'makli, on the inyan of was behemshach hakosef, without the points that it says further in the pasuk, is genug zu poil sein by Yaakov dem katainti, is enough of a reason that caused Yaakov to be katainti, to be humble, as the Alter Rebbe says, b'ma'oid ma'oid, to be extremely humble. It all comes from these two words of ki b'makli. So what is the significance of these two words ki b'makli? Tzemach Tzedek bringt up in Eira Teire von Shalah. So the Tzemach Tzedek brings in Eira Teire from the Shalah what these two words ki b'makli means. As ki b'makli is Rosh Tevis. The ki b'makli is a Rosh Tevis of Baruch Kavoid Hashem im Kaimai and L'shuascha Kivisi Hashem. Of these two different psukim, it's hinted in these words ki b'makli. That's the significance of these two words. Und the Tzemach Tzedek is Meisif. Then the Tzemach Tzedek adds to this. What he means to say is as follows. This is similar, these two psukim. What is the significance of these two psukim? Baruch kavoid Hashem im kaimai and l'shuascha kivisi Hashem. What's the connection here? So this is al derech is bar b'Torah. This is similar to what's explained in the Alter Rebbe explains in Torah be'inyin mishpat utztake beYaakov, that by Ya'ata Sisa, that the Eibishter has done justice and righteousness with Yaakov. So over here as well, there's a combination of mishpat and tzedakah, which means shetzarich li is beis abechinis tzedakah and mishpat, that you need both levels. On one hand, righteousness, but on the other hand, justice. V'hainu beis abechinis baruch kavod Hashem im kaimai v'shiyeh l'shuascha kivisi v'chulu. And these are the two levels that we're speaking about. The two psukim that are hinted in ki b'makli, Baruch kavod Hashem im kaimai, and also the shuascha kivisi Hashem. So, as the Rebbe will explain, the connection over here, what's going on? What's the connection of these two psukim, Baruch kavod Hashem im kaimai, and the shuascha kivisi Hashem, the combination of these two, to the combination of mishpat and tzedakah? And what's Bechlal this whole union? Mishpat and tzedakah, justice, righteousness. What is this all about? So the Rabbi will explain this all be'arichis over here in the Sikha. But the point is that when the Alter Rebbe quotes the two words ki b'makli, the Alter Rebbe is hinting over here to this shalah that in these two words ki b'makli itself, you see over here the tremendous avodah of Yaakov Avinu. The beer in them is, so the explanation here is as follows. Von dem, was es steht, Mishpat und Tzedakah bei Yaakov ata sisa. It says that the Eibishter has done with Yaakov both Mishpat and Tzedakah. Is move on as by Yaakovin zene gewen die beide middes. So the reason why Hashem does Mishpat and Tzedakah with Yaakov is because Yaakov himself and his Aveda had both Mishpat and Tzedakah. Und die Anhage mit is euch gewen sei Mishpat and sei Tzedakah. And therefore the Eibishter behaves with him also in this manner, both with Mishpat, with justice, and with righteousness. Now what's the Chiddush here? Although seemingly or simply justice, Mishpat, and Tzedakah, righteousness, are opposites. Mishpat meint, what does Mishpat mean? As das was mont kommt al pidin, that a person is demanding something that it's justified, he deserves it. Sorry, that's what justice means, that it's something that the person deserves. That's on one hand. Und der Main von Tzedakah is, on the other hand, what's the concept of tzedakah? As al pidin umishpat is minim nit nechoyev zu geben. That if you're going to judge the person, if you're going to look whether he deserves it or not, he doesn't. Nor das wird ihm gegeben als tzedakah, but it's being granted to him as a righteousness beyond what he deserves. So mishpat and tzedakah are opposites and sort of a contradiction to one another. If you deserve it, if it's justice, then there's no need for tzedakah. And if there's a need for tzedakah, so then it's not justice. The chiddush over here is that you have both. You have mishpat and tzedakah. So seemingly we can say, as das retzich and shayches zu zwei besondere beginnes. When the pasuk says that there's a combination of mishpat and tzedakah, it's actually referring to two different elements, two different aspects of the person. Mitzad the neshama, because of the neshama that a yid has, can a yid monen in yanav beim eibishten b'teiras mishpat. A yid with his neshama, which is deserving, which is connected always, he can demand justly for the ashpah, for the connection to the eibishter. The neshama kumt ir in yanam apidin. The neshama deserves whatever it needs justly. But on the other hand, as far as the body of the person is concerned, which is deficient, which is lacking, which is not necessarily deserving, here a person is begging and requesting of Hashem to provide for him, even for his body, just with righteousness. So it's two different aspects of the person. They don't really go together. It's a contradiction, but it's referring to two different aspects. Das ist aber nicht ausgehalten. However, this pshat is incorrect. Warum der Pasuk sagt doch, Mishpat und Tzedakah bei Yaakov ata asisa, that Hashem has done the Mishpat and Tzedakah for Yaakov, and it uses the term asisa, that both the Mishpat and the Tzedakah are together in the level of asiyah. Das heißt, as beide middes hafchiyas, both of these opposite ways of the Eibishter behaving with a Yid, zenin in shayches zu demselben Geder Welt. It's both regarding the same place and the same world, von Asisa, Asiyah B'Payil, in the world of Asiyah B'Payil. And we combine in the same aspect of the person both Mishpat and Tzedakah. So how could you combine these two if they are a contradiction? Is the Asbara in them? So the answer here is, Euch dan, wenn man halt bei Madrege, was berechtigt zu mannen, Hashpas, Hateuf, und Eibishten mitzadadin. Even an individual that's on a level, he's a great tzaddik, and therefore he could demand, he's justified to demand from the Eibishter to provide for him, according to, even if he'll be judged, he's deserving. Wie die Gemara sagt, as the Gemara says, Eifum Pasik, Shimu Eilai Abirei Leiv, listen to me, the strong ones, the strong individuals, that are very distant from tzedakah. What does it mean that they're distant from tzedakah? The entire world is being fed only with the Eibishter's righteousness. In other words, they're not deserving what the Eibishter gives them anyways. And these great tzaddikim, the abirei leiv, the ones with strong hearts that serve the Eibishter on a very high level, they get fed with their arm. In other words, they can take and demand by force, so to speak, because they're deserving. So that's the person that's on a level where mishpat, in other words, the Eibishter gives him with mishpat, the Eibishter, he deserves it. Von deswegen, however, what the pasuk here is saying is that nevertheless, darf man das beten als tzedakah. You should only request this as something that the Eibusher is giving you out of his righteousness, and that you don't deserve it. Und wie steht, l'cho Hashem tzedakah, that everything that the Eibusher gives is tzedakah, so including the individual that could demand it justly, that he deserves it, nevertheless, tzedakah. You should only demand it as a tzedakah. So that's what it means over here when the pasuk says, Mishpat u'tzedakah b'yakiv ata sisa, that even if you're on the level of Mishpat, nevertheless, you should demand it only as a tzedakah. What's taka the inyan in this? What is the point to only demand it as a tzedakah if you're on a level of a tzaddik that deserves it and you don't have to demand as a tzedakah? So the Rabbi here explains this concept and the way we see this regarding Yaakov himself. Das is echt der Tam von Yaakov's meire far Esavin. This we can see, and this explains why Yaakov was so afraid when he was coming to approach Esav. Hagam hat schon darauf gehabt auf Toche von Eibishter. Although he already had a clear promise from the Eibishter, Vevhine anochi imach goyim, the Eibishter says, I am there with you. So why is Yaakov afraid? So now Chazal tell us why is he afraid. Shemon is lachlachti bechet. Maybe I've become dirty with Averis, and therefore the promise will not be fulfilled. However, does gufa fadet be? The fact that he's afraid that he sinned itself is something that needs an additional explanation. Chazal tell us as kivim sheyatzu roiv shnoisav shel adam, that once a person, most of the days of a person's life have passed, v'lechat, and he hasn't sinned, shuv enechaita, he will not sin anymore. Ubemela. So if so, is das mechayiv as Yaakov hat schon nicht gehabt, was zu choishe sein, shemen es lachlachti bechet. So if so, Yaakov over here had no reason to be concerned about the fact that I may have become dirty with sins. Because Yaakov Avinu, most of his lifetime has already passed. As the Rabbi brings in Order 22, that already at the time when he was promised, he was 77 years old, according to what Rashi says, and that's already most of his lifetime. So Yaakov already from then has no reason to be concerned whatsoever. So why was Yaakov afraid when he came to approach Esav? However, so the point over here is, das als is wenn sein Metzies vernimmt bei ihm in Art. When a person and who he is and what he's doing and his connection to the Eibishter is something that's significant in his eyes. His entity as a person for himself is significant to you. Und der Fahr kann der Cheshben ihm bringen zu der Maskane. So now this calculation that you see who you are and you see what you're doing, and as we said, that most of the life of the person has already passed. So this brings a person to the conclusion, as says Yatsu Rav Shneisa v'loichat, that it's already most of his life has passed and he hasn't sinned. And therefore he's already guaranteed that he's not going to sin anymore. So that's if a person is thinking logically and assessing his being, of who he is and what he's doing. And if he's from those very strong, mighty hearted people, so then he could demand, like with an arm, he can demand he can demand the ashpa of the Eibusher because he deserves it. However, if a person has a real, genuine level of bittul, a self-nullification to the Eibusher, he's not thinking about himself, he's not thinking about what he's doing and what he's deserving and what level he reached. As there is by sich kein Metziesnet. He's nothing for himself. He doesn't think about himself at all. Absolute bittul. Is mitzadem hergesh hakatnus va bittul. When a person is so humble and nullified to Hashem, is nidme be'einav shachata. So he'll imagine, it'll seem to him that he has sinned. What does this mean, chata? And is choishish as do achet. He's concerned about of some kind of a sin, al kolpanim achasaran, that he's still lacking. Person that's very humble, person that's totally nullified to Hashem and is not thinking about what if I have accomplished, is always has the attitude that there's something more I can do. I'm still lacking. I still have not done enough. Achasaran in sein Aved, there's something still lacking in his Aved. Und der Fahr legt sich bei ihm up as the ashpas hatoev can bakum nar al tzedakah. So therefore, his attitude will be that I can't demand, I'm not deserving, it's not me that I've accomplished, and his attitude will be, I could only ask for Hashem to be righteous to me, to have the tzedakah to give me, even though I don't deserve. This is the attitude of a person that's humble, a person that's bottled to the Eibishter and is not thinking by himself. And this is the Adarabah, dafke by a tzaddik omer, someone that's a great tzaddik, and he could demand with justice, But nevertheless, because of his bittul, he only demands it out of tzedakah. So now based on this, es is aber nicht move on. If so, the question here is, wie bald as the bittul von Yaakov in atem gebracht zu dem Eifem von tzedakah. So since, as we see here by Yaakov Avinu, because of his tremendous level of bittul to Hashem, so this brings him to only ask in a way of tzedakah. He doesn't see himself as deserving in any way. So then why does the pasuk here mention mishpat? Why does it say that there's both mishpat, that the justice that he's demanding for, and then tzedakah that there is by Yaakov? For from them is mashma. From this it seems, as this is given by Yaakov in ubemela, as this darv zayin oich dem oifen from mishpat, that there was by Yaakov mishpat, the fact that he was perfect and the fact that he was deserving, and also the union of tzedakah. But according to what we're saying, the mishpat doesn't add anything. The main point is to reach to the level of bittul where the person sees himself as not deserving at all because of his tremendous bittul, and therefore he just demands, or not demands that is, he requests that the Eibusha should give him with righteousness. So why does the pasuk over here also say mishpat u'tzedakah b'Yaakov? Is that bezeh? So the explanation here is as follows. There's actually a deeper thing, there's a deeper level of bittul that comes when you have the mishpat u'tzedakah b'Yaakov. B'shas min is be'emes. Oh, this is nid maloi kain. In a matziv, was beten beim Eibishten blois als tzedakah. If a person is truly in a situation that he could only demand with tzedakah, he's not deserving at all. Or even a person that could demand, but in his imagination and what he understands with himself, he sees, he imagines that he cannot demand of Hashem. It's only a tzedakah. Is das beten tzedakah nit kenechacha av bittul. So then, when a person is asking and begging of Hashem to provide for him, because I'm not deserving, is not a real proof that this is a person that's humble and that's bottled to the Eibishter. Because the fact that he's asking and begging that the Eibishter should be righteous to him and give him with tzedakah, why is he asking only with tzedakah? Because he has no other choice. Because he has nothing, he's not deserving. Or at least in his imagination, he doesn't see himself as deserving. So therefore he only asks for tzedakah. But not necessarily is this a proof that it's coming out of humility. He has no other choice. Ba'ayimik yoiser, or the same point but a step deeper, das is leut sein bitteldige mitzias umedide va'akbala. Even if there is a level of bittul here that the person has, and therefore he's coming to Hashem very humble and begging from the Eibishter to give him, but nevertheless, this itself that he finds himself in this humble situation, so therefore he's asking out of that level that he is, with that level of humility that he has, which has its limitations as well. Right? This is the limited situation that he's in, that he's not deserving and he doesn't have more to ask. So yes, there is definitely a level of humility here. However, this humility also has its limitation. He's lacking. He can't do anymore, and therefore this limitation of his bittul is part of the reason of why he's only asking for righteousness. It's not simply bittul, but there's a certain limitation involved in this bittul, that he is in this situation being limited, that he can't ask for more. So that is when you have tzedakah. Just tzedakah alone is a person that's limited in his bittul, that he has no more. Midah keneged midah. So if so, corresponding to this bittul that the person has that's limited, kumt euch die ashpal mil maila loit der medide bagbale was is in tzedakah. So the ashpal that comes from above is also limited according to the level of tzedakah. Where do we find the limitation of tzedakah? Wie the Gemara sagt, as the Gemara tells us regarding the mitzvah of tzedakah, that there's a certain limitation. As the chiyuv from tzedakah is when you give tzedakah, you have to provide for the poor person what he's lacking, what he's accustomed to, and that's what he's lacking. You're not obligated to go and give him luxuries, extras to make him rich, things that he's not accustomed to. Which means, what he's given in tzedakah is according to the situation that he's in, with his mitzias and what he's lacking, and that's what he's being provided. In was is eingeweint, and the things that he's accustomed to. Was das kann euch sein, a ribi gadol. This could be a lot, this could be in abundance. Aber doch gemosten Leut sein de gilis. But nevertheless, it's still limited according to what the person is accustomed to. If the person is accustomed to having a horse to ride on and servants to run ahead of him, you have to provide that as well. So there's a lot that may be included in tzedakah, for whatever a person is accustomed to. But nevertheless, all measured and limited according to the mitzias of what the person is. However, to give him beyond what he needs more, to give him luxuries and extras, that's something that is not part of the mitzvah of tzedakah. So it's the same thing also, the ashpah of the Eibishter that comes to a person that's in a situation of tzedakah, where he's really needy, where he's batel, he's really humble because he has no more. So over here, this bittul is a limited level of bittul, and therefore the tzedakah is also limited. However, b'shas is an amatzav u'mitzias, was is wert zu bekommen die ashpahs. When a person is in a situation that he is worthy, he is deserving to get the ashpah of the Eibishter. And the person could demand this justly, he deserves it. Und doch kommt zum Eibishter, and nevertheless, he comes and approaches the Eibishter nicht mit der Tviyah von Mishpat, not demanding it with this deserving that he deserves. Nor mit dem Bakash al tzedakah. He comes and he begs it from the Eibishter that the Eibishter should give him as a tzedakah, because of the Eibishter's righteousness. Is das a haichache? So this is a proof as that is a reis von cheshbainis medidis vagbalas. So here, this is a level of bittul, where the person has completely dropped and left any of his own personal assessment and calculations and ideas about who he is and what he's holding at, as that is a reis von sein metzias. The person is not thinking about himself at all. He's saying to the Eibishter, please give me because of your kindness. Nothing to do with my situation. Even though he is worthy, but we can see that he's ignoring that. He's leaving that. He's dropping that. And here he's completely depending on the Eibishter. This is a level of bittul that's completely out of the limitations of the person. If the person is coming and begging from the Eibishter with humility, but that humility itself is a result of the matzav, of the situation that he's in, because he taka has nothing. So then over here, this is a humility where he never fully left himself. He never fully dropped himself. Adarabah, this humility is a result of who he is. But over here, the humility of tzedakah, when there is a mishpat, meaning that he really does deserve it, and yet he does not pay attention to what he deserves. He puts that aside and turns purely to the Eibishter. This is the pure bittul where the person completely drops his own mitzias. On demult, and then the result of this is as the ashpos at tzedakah is an ofen von the meilim im didevak bolle. The tzedakah comes from the Eibishter completely beyond any limitations. Was is nit verbunden mit sein metzias, which is not related to who the person is, and anything that he's lacking. It's not about you. The person is not turning to the Eibishter, having himself his own condition in mind. He's turning to the Eibishter that the Eibishter should provide for him because of a righteousness of the Eibishter, and therefore the Eibishter will give him with an abundance, even ashiras. So those are the two levels of how a person could turn to the Eibishter. Even with bittul, in bittul kufa, we have the two levels of bittul here. Ati zwei beginnes. So these two levels of bittul. Aleph, a matze from betten als tzedakah. A situation where a person is really humble because he is lacking. He's lacking, and therefore he comes to ask out of that place of humility that he has nothing, and therefore he asks tzedakah. So this is a level of bittul, but with a certain limitation. It's based on who he is. Beis a matzah von abidei leiv umen ken manim bezraya. But then a situation where a person has a very strong heart, meaning that he could demand it with taking by force. He deserves it. But nevertheless, he completely puts aside who he is and what he could demand, and he just asks it as a tzedakah. So then werd it tzedakah and ofen from bligvul. So over here you have a much higher level of tzedakah, the tzedakah of bligvul. So those are the two levels at the pasuk that we see here in this pasuk of mishpat u'tzedakah beyakiv. There is the level of tzedakah alone, which is the lower level of bittul, when the person is taka lacking, and then you have the level of tzedakah that comes along with mishpat. So these two levels, zenen masim zu di zwei inyanim, aleph l'shoascha kivisi avaye, beis baruch k'vay davayim im kaimai. This is connected to the two psukim that are hinted in the Rosh Tevis of Ki B'makli, the pasuk of L'shuascha Kivisi Avaye and the pasuk Baruch Kavod Avayim Im Kaimai. As the Tzemach Tzedek says, that it's related to the two inyanim of Mishpat U'tzedakah B'Yaakov. The Rebbe explains, L'shuascha Kivisi Avaye, when we say that a person hopes to the help, to the salvation of the Eibishter. Pirushe, what this means is, as kenzach blois verlassen of the Yeshua von the Eibishter, that he is in a situation that he could only rely on Hashem. He's not deserving. He himself is not worthy of demanding. Und hofft auf dem Eibishter's Yeshua. So he's hoping that the Eibishter will come and help him, als tzedakah. The Eibishter will be righteous and help him. So this is the first level of bittul, where a person is humble and is mavatal himself to the Eibishter, but he's not fully dropping who he is. He's not fully letting go of that. Adarabah, his humility itself is a result of his mitzias. Because this is his situation, that's how he turns to Hashem. And this you see in the pasuk, Lishuascha kivisi avaya, a person that's just hoping to the Yeshua, to the salvation of the Eibishter, because he has nothing on his own. Baruch kavod avayim im kaimai. On the other hand, when we say gebenched is the Eibishter, the glory of the Eibishter in his place, weist auf der Amshache von kavod avaya. What this refers to is drawing down the glory of the Eibishter, was nimmt sich von mekaimai, that comes from the Eibishter's place, which is Amitis Amokim from Kavod Avaya, the true place of where the Eibishter is, meaning that the person completely lets go of himself and he's turning to the Eibishter, that it should come from your place, not from any place where I, in my situation, am deserving. Und das wird nimshach baruch, lashon hamshacha. The word baruch also means to draw down, bis lamata mata, to bring it down to the person here below. Das heißt, Hamshachas habligvul dolamata, to draw down the infinite bracha from the Eibishter here below. Was wird aufgetan? How could you bring down this level of bligvul, which is related to the concept of ashiris that we spoke about before, when you have an abundance of a revelation? Durch den bittel amitzias von the abire leiv harachoyke mitzdake. This comes by a person that is strong-hearted and could demand al pidin. But he drops his whole mitzias. He doesn't think about himself at all. And he still demands it only out of tzedakah. So over here, when you have the full absolute bittul, this draws down kvoid avayim mimekaimai, the true bligvul of the Eibishter as a result of this level of bittul. So those are the two inyanim that are hinted in Ki B'makli, these two levels. Api kol analysis based on all this is move on. Das the Alter Rebbe schreibt, so we understand why the Alter Rebbe, when he quotes over here, he writes, Mipnei ayis kotten Yaakov b'ma'oid, ma'oid be'einav. Yaakov was extremely humble in his eyes. Machmas ribiyach hasadim, the abundance of kindness of the Eibishter, ki b'makli. And he quotes from the pasuk just these two words, ki b'makli chulo. Bringt nicht dem hemshach v'siyam akasav. Does not quote the continuation of the pasuk. Durch dem, was bei Yaakov in seine Gewendi, beide hofchis de gebechines. By Yaakov, so he included in his Aveda both these two seemingly opposite behaviors, from Mishpat and Tzedakah, both the Mishpat and Tzedakah. Velachazan merumiz in Ki B'makli canal, which is hinted in Ki B'makli, which hints to Lishuascha Kevisi Avaya and to Baruch Kavod Hashem Im Kaimai, which connects the two, Mishpat and Tzedakah. Hat erlangt in der Madrege, wo alla Shpoi sind b'pchines Chasadim und Riboya Chasadim. So because Yaakov Avinu on one hand is on a level of Mishpat, that he could demand it, he is deserving, and yet he only demands it as a tzedakah. So this is the absolute bittul. This is not only the bittul of the Shuascha Kevisi Avaya, this is the bittul that comes with tzedakah, that comes after the mishpat. When you have both together, that reaches to Baruch Kavod Avayim and Mekaimai. And this is that what brings the bligvul, the ribuya chasadim, the tremendous hashpah from the Eibishter. The hashpah and anoifen from Baruch Kavod Avayim and Mekaimai, ribuya chasadim ebchenes bligvul, the abundance of kindness that comes unlimited. Und mitzad dem, was die Agdole und ribuya chasadim zene bei ihm gewen als Tetzah von Ki B'makli. So because by Yaakov, the tremendous kindness that the Eibishter did with him was a result of what's hinted in these words, Ki B'makli, which refers to not only Lishuascha Kevisi Avaya, but also Baruch Kavod Hashem Im Kaimai, drawing down from a much higher level. Di Kirvas Alakim Mamish. So this closeness of the Eibishter, this tremendous hashpah of the Eibishter, by him gebracht, dem Katainti Betachlis Hashleimus, it brought him to the level of humility. And the highest, utmost level, cotton b'ma'oid ma'oid, and a very extremely small and humble in his eyes through this tremendous hashpah from the Eibishter. So l'chayre, what this means is even before Yaakov Avinu got this hashpah, Yaakov Avinu was already on a very high level of bittul. Not only of the level of bittul that you have when you're lacking and you're approaching the Eibishter with tzedakah, so over there that level of bittul is based on your mitzias, because you are lacking. But then there's a higher level of bittul that Yaakov was on, that he had mishpat. He could have demanded it, but nevertheless he put aside his own deserving, and he turns to the Eibishter, give me mitzad, your tzedakah. I'm requesting and begging. That's an even higher level of bittul. And then as a result, he gets a hashpah of bli gvul of ribui chasadim. And now, after this hashpah of ribui chasadim, this elevates Yaakov even to a higher level of bittul than he was on before, and that's the cotton b'ma'oid ma'oid that Yaakov was extremely humble, an even greater level of bittul through this revelation of bli gvul. Und das ist euch, was der Alter Rebbe ist mamshech. And this is what the Alter Rebbe says. As a yeis cotton Yaakov b'ma'oid ma'oid be'enov machmas ribui chasadim ki b'makli. Is the far ve'ener ra'oi o kedai klal hinotzelcholo. And therefore, Yaakov was thinking that he's not at all worthy, he's not at all fitting that the Eibusher should save him. U'kemayim Razal, as Chazal say, Shema yigrem achet shenidma beinav shachata. That in his eyes, he thought to himself that the Averis that he did would cause that he should not be saved. What does this mean? Vibald Yaakov is gestanen betachlis habittel. Because Yaakov was on a level of absolute bittel. Hat gelangt in Od der Madrege, so he reached to such a level wo the Metzias bederach memelo ich Averis an Evraim vernehmen bei sei nit kein Ort. So he reaches to such a level that anything that a person will do has no value whatsoever. There's no value to anything of the Aveda of Nevraim in the world. That's really over here the point when it says that nidmaloi. When the far is nidme be'einav shechata, when Chazal tell us that he imagined in his eyes that maybe he sinned, what this means is is gestanen in achet meloshen chesaron ubitl be'etzem. What it means is that he came to a place where, in essence, legabe this level, no matter what he's going to do, is lacking, is insignificant completely. And therefore his Aveda had absolutely no tfisas makom whatsoever. In other words, when we learn the simple pshat of nidme be'einav shechata, so this is, in other words, Yaakov Avinu was thinking, and he was assessing, and he made a cheshbon, and he was imagining, maybe I sinned, I'm not sure, he was once unsure about this. That's a simple pshat. But the Rabbi is saying a much deeper pshat. Nidme be'einav shechata means he got elevated. He got elevated to a level where over there, in this level, when you're so close to the Eibishter, the mitzias of a nivra, the entity of who you are, is be'emes not teifes makim, is truly insignificant whatsoever. So over here, in his eyes, being on this level, chata, he's in a level where he's completely lacking, where he has nothing, he's totally insignificant. That's the nidba bein of shachata that happens through the tremendous chasadim of the Eibishter. Und das ist euch der Keshet zwischen die zwei Pirushim auf die Werte ki b'makli. This brings us back to understand now the connection of the two Pirushim that there are in ki b'makli. Pirush HaPashit, the simple pshat that lehoye imi ela makli levadai, that it refers to the fact that Yaakov Avinu was so poor that all he had with him is a stick. Pirush HaMedrash, and then what the Medrash says, Nosa makle b'yarden v'nifka yarden, that this makal itself was used to split the yarden, the greatest chesed that he was worthy of. So how did he have these two pshatim in one word? Weil die beide Pirushim dricken ois, die zwei hofchis die getnues, was eine gewen bei Yaakovin. Both of these Pirushim in the same pasuk express the two opposite that you find by Yaakov Avinu himself. Mitzad echad, on one hand, hat gar nicht gehat, he had nothing on his own, und bet beim Eibishten nor als tzedakah. Yaakov Avinu feels that he's completely lacking, he's not deserving, he's not a mitzias for himself whatsoever, he's approaching and asking of Hashem, the Eibishter's righteousness. Only idach, but on the other hand, steht in azad haibene darge. Yaakov truly was on such a high level, bis zu wert sein, to be worthy, the anhagen nisses von nifka yarden, that the Eibishter splits the yarden for him. Was das Gufa beweist, as is right, so haben die Ashbaz, Achsadim, Beteres Mishpat, that really he is worthy. He is on a very high level that the Eibishter provides for him even the greatest miracles. Und der Mishpat und Tzedakah be Yaakov Ata Asisa, when you have the combination of the two, the Mishpat and the Tzedakah together, was hat Geirem given, as die Beginne von Katainti soll sein betachlis hashleimos, this caused that Yaakov came to the ultimate level of humility, the highest level of bittul. As we said before, that what's the true concept of bittul? That the person does have a metzias and there is a mishpat that he could demand for, and yet he ignores it, he drops it, he turns completely to the Eibishter. So this is a bittul where you totally put yourself aside. Das is given, Yagdame v'hachane. This level of bittul was ultimately the introduction and the preparation, as al mekuyim v'er in tefillah, that the Eibusher did fulfill what he davened and asked for, hatzileinina, that he should be saved from Esav, and v'ata amarta gaimen, v'samti ezaracha k'chol hayom, asher lo yisafim erev, that the Eibusher will give him children and descendants that will be as much as the sand that cannot be counted. This is the level of tzedakah, or really ashiras, when you have such a high level of bittul. So through this you get the ashpah that's bleak vul out of any boundaries whatsoever. This is the ashiras, or the lo yisafim erev, that ultimately Yaakov was zeichet to. So this is the hezber over here of the connection of the two pirushim. It's the kibbeh makli. On one hand, Yaakov feels like he's extremely poor and he has nothing on his own, but yet that's not a bittul that comes that he's approaching the Eibusher because he's really in that situation, that he has nothing, and therefore that kind of a bittul is ultimately based on who you are. Rather, Yaakov himself really is kibbeh makli avarti yisayadin, like the other pshat, that he is worthy of the greatest chesed. And yet he doesn't pay attention to that, because he has the full real bittul that he's totally dependent only on the Eibusher and not thinking about himself whatsoever. The hirav from them in Avedas kol echad v'echad. A lesson that we could take from this, applying it to the Aveda of every individual. Says Yedua as jede Yid hat bi Yerusha me'ein von the Avedas von given by the Avos. We know that all Yidden inherit an Aveda that's similar to what there was by the Avos. Then kein Avos elo l'shloisha, and therefore there's only these three of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov that we refer to in davening as the Avos. For some them is moving binyaneinu. So we understand here as well. As nid blois is jede Yid roi zu beten by Meibishten Ashpas a chesed al tzedakah. Not only could every Yid come and ask of the Eibusher to give him kindness because of tzedakah, because of the Eibusher's righteousness, nor that is euch wert zu bakumenes beteires mishpat. A Yid really could also come and demand the Eibusher to give him justly. He's deserving for the Eibusher to give him. Sorry. Varom v'bald kol Yisrael b'nei melachim. Since all Yidden are princes, is the fact, wie Kvektushes Mervechami Admor hat amal gesagt, so as the Friedige Rebbe once said, Vert euch hat tircha hachi kal von a Yidden gerechnet wie an Avedes Perech. Even if a Yid has to even slightly work and do something that's even just a little bit of work for him, is like completely out of his norm. Avedes Perech is when a person serves and does something and works hard, difficult labor out of the norm. Because that's not something that's deserving for a Yid, which are b'nei malachim. Und zu lieb dem, kann schein mannen beim Eibischen kol hoin dalme. So the fact that a Yid has to work even the slightest work, he can demand from the Eibusher the greatest treasures in the world. Bebanne, chaye, und beseine reviche. That the Eibusher should provide for him in children, in health, and in parnasse, in food, and he should have it in abundance. So this is what a Yid could demand from the Eibusher justly. Und the Alter Rebbe sagt in Teire Oyer, as the Alter Rebbe says in Teire Oyer, based on the Gemara, as Ma'adach Nebuchadnezzar. If we find by Nebuchadnezzar, was is gegangen Gimel Psiis Lekavad Amakim. So the Gemara says he took 3 steps in the Eibusher's honor. Hat ihm gegeben the far Malchus v'chulo if Gimel Deiris. Because of this, the Eibusher gave him Malchus, that the kingdom continued for his children 3 generations. By Yidden. How much more so this is true by every Yid. You don't have one Yid that has not given the Eibusher this honor of walking 3 steps for the Eibusher's sake. It's kol tuv olam hazeh kedai ulai. So all the goodness that exists in the world is worthy for a Yid, and he deserves it. Das was mir zet. Now, so the fact that we do see as a Yid hot yisurim in olam hazeh, that a Yid experiences pain in this world, is as blois levatishes adam lachnia yola hashbal gasas ruchay. The reason is this comes to break the haughtiness, the gaiva that there is in a person's heart, and in order for him to have the proper bittul to the Eibishter, so those yisurim, whatever a person is, the difficulties a person is experiencing, is ultimately for his good, in order to break the klippe and the gasas haruach that exists in him. That's the only thing that's preventing this goodness that a Yid justly deserves of coming to him. B'shas aber a Yid halt by mishpat u'tzedakah. But if a Yid is serving the Eibusher in this manner of mishpat and tzedakah, which means as agam as vert b'toires mishpat, that although, as we said, every Yid is worthy, justly deserving for the Eibusher to give him, von deswegen better by Eibusher als tzedakah, but nevertheless he comes and he approaches the Eibusher with a bittul. He comes and asks just as a tzedakah. Was Vayishlach der Tnur from Bittul v'Shiflas Kana, which means that the person is coming with a real level of Bittul, and a very high level of Bittul, as the Rebbe explained before. Then you get the ultimate and full, unlimited bracha from the Eibishter's place. As vet nimshach hatzlacha, you bring the success in the person l'mayla mim kol medida v'agbala, higher than any limitation whatsoever in all zayin yanim, in all matters that a person needs, bana, chayim, mezayne, on an anoifim fun reviche, with abundance. On as veren bottle alle dvaram am avalvalim, all things that disturb a person will be annulled, as azal zayin yoshev b'shalva saylam haza, that a person can sit and serve the Eibishter peacefully in tranquility here in this world. So the only thing that's preventing that ashpah to come to the person is the gasas haruach that doesn't allow the ashpah to reach him. But when a person has the bittul, so then not only are you removing that gasas haruach that is the cause for the yisurim or any difficulties a person is experiencing, but the bittul itself also becomes the greatest keli for this gilui of bli gvul to the person to have everything that he needs. B'bana chaim ezayin reviche. Das ist echt der Sheiches von Ot, die in Yanim, zu der Geula von Alten Rebbe. This is also the connection of these subjects here to the redemption, the liberation of the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe hat sich meist in Nefesh gewähnt auf Afatzas Pnimiyas HaTeire. So we know the Alter Rebbe had self-sacrifice for spreading the secrets, the Pnimiyas of Teire. Hat sich abgerissen von seinen Yanim. The Alter Rebbe tore himself away of his own things that he could have done for himself to serve the Eibusher on his own level as a tzaddik. In order to gave away from his own time for spreading chassidus, biz eichen chutza, to spread it to all far and wide to the lowest places. So the Alter Rebbe, in his Aveda, it was all self-sacrifice. Is doch sicher, als hat gekent Mannen sein Befreiung beteires Din und Mishpat. So the Alter Rebbe certainly was able to demand his release, that he deserves it rightfully, justly. Doch hat das gebeten als Stocke. Nevertheless, the Alter Rebbe requested and davened for this as a righteousness, that the Eibusher should give it to him as a tzedakah. Wie is meidich in seinem Mechtavim, as you see in the letters of the Alter Rebbe that he wrote, as ein Geula is given chazdei Hashem, it's purely the kindness of the Eibusher, was hifli v'higdel havaya lasis baretz, that the Eibusher did this tremendous kindness for him here in this world. So we see by the Alter Rebbe this same level of bittul here, similar to what we find by Yaakov Avinu, that on one hand he's deserving on the highest level, with the highest level of Mesiris Nefesh, and yet the Alter Rebbe is asking and saying that this is all a chesed from the Eibishter. And therefore, through this Aveda of the Alter Rebbe, hat das gebracht, as the Yula zal sein and an Eifum from Pada b'Shalem nafshi, this brought a liberation that happened in a manner of Pada b'Shalem, that the Pediyah is a full liberation in a peaceful way. As is batel geworden the Isnagdus of Teres Achsidis, that it first of all it completely annulled the opposition on Teres Achsidis ultimately, and not only that, va'adarabes is an geworden imod doi in an Eifum from Shalem, that they came around to become supporters of the Alter Rebbe and in a peaceful manner. The pasuk is Messiah, as the pasuk continues and concludes, Ki berabim hoyu imodi, that many were along supporting me in this.